guys, this is Smithy. Welcome to my channel. If you guys are new here, welcome, and if you guys have already been subscribed to the channel, thank you so much for subscribing. Today's video is another dupe video, and it is of the newest Natasha Denona Circo Loco palette. Now, I personally was not interested in this palette just because it's a rainbow palette. It is inspired with the circus, I would say, and that is why there's a lot of jewel tones and a lot of like bright, colorful shades in that palette, which I personally feel that I do own in several different palettes, so I do not need like duplicates of that. So that is what we're going to do today. We're going to find out dupes for the Natasha Denona's, the newest palette, the Circo Loco palette. Now this palette retails for $129, which is a lot of money according to my opinion, I would say. I personally feel if this was that $65 midi palette, a lot of people would be interested in it. But yes, so we're gonna find out whether you actually need this palette in your collection or you actually own this palette. So I'm gonna give you swatches and comparison according to the swatches that is there available on Natasha Denona's website. So that is the main focal point of me comparing my shades. So yeah, without further ado, let's dive right into the video. So the first shade in the palette is called Firework, which is a matte orange shade. But I would say if you guys do have Orange You Glide palette from Colourpop, the Rise and Grind shade from that palette is exactly the same shade as the Firework in the Natasha Denona palette. For this video purposes, the closest dupe for me would be Big Cocktails from the Colourpop's Yes Please palette. The second shade is called Razzle Dazzle, which is duped by Nabla's Secret palette, and the shade name is called Big Experience. Now this is again a very nice, bright, shimmery pink shade, I would say. It's more of a magenta shade rather than a pink shade. As you can see in the swatch, it's very, very vibrant and very, very similar to that shade. The next shade in the palette is called Acrobat, which is also being duped by Nabla's Secret palette, and this is the shade called Addiction in the palette. And this is also a matte peely blue, I would say. It leans more towards the blue rather than green, but it's a beautiful shade to like amp up your blue looks. I absolutely love that in conjunction with any other shades here in this palette. I find that as a perfect dupe to the shade called Acrobat in the Natasha Denona Circo Loco palette. The fourth shade in the palette is called Snow Cone, which is more of the silvery shade with a blue undertone, and which is being duped by my Juvia's Place Magic Mini palette, and the shade name is called Yamoha. This is an exact dupe of that shade. This also is a very shiny metallic silver with a blue undertone. I was absolutely happy with this dupe. So yes, let's move on to the next shade. The next shade in the palette is called Cotton Candy, which is again duped by Nabla's Secret palette, and the shade name is called Guilitia. And it's this pink shade. It's again a matte milky pink shade. It's like a very cotton candy shade, which is what the name is. So yeah, so this shade is exactly the dupe for the cotton candy shade. Now let's move on to the second row. The first shade in the second row is called Electric, which is being duped by Juvia's Place Masquerade palette, and the shade name is called Dahlia. It's this metallic blue. The swatches are spot on for this shade. I mean, you will definitely not be disappointed. Most of the shades, I would say, are coming from Juvia's Place Magic Mini palette, Masquerade palette, and the Nabla palette. A few of the shades coming from here and there, but most of the shades are from this palette. Let's move on to the next shade. And the next shade in the palette is called Grin, which is a metallic gold shade. Now, you do not need this particular palette, but I am using this palette just because I feel this is the closest dupe that I could find. And this is from my Pat McGrath Eye Ecstasy Subversive palette, and it's the middle shade that you're seeing here. It's very, very similar in the shade. And if you have like a yellow gold in your collection, I mean, you will definitely not be disappointed. If you have any Pat McGrath shadow palette, I would say she does a lot of golds. Yeah, it'll be very, very similar to that. So yeah, nothing special out of the box, but if you have like a yellow gold in your collection, that would be mostly very, very comparable to the Grin shade. So the next shade in the palette is called Canon, which is being duped by another Nabla shade, and this is called Creation Crown, which is this beautiful coppery gold shade, I would say. Swatch wise, spot on. And you cannot go wrong with Nabla eyeshadow palettes. I mean, it's such an amazing quality to have in your collection. You definitely need to experience this to understand the feeling and the quality of the shadow. So this is very, very, very comparable to that shade. So the next shade in the Natasha Denona palette is called Flip, which is being duped by Buzzo from the Magic palette, which is this shimmery green shade in the palette. And it's a very, very impactful shade. You know Juvia's Place shadows, or if you've not experienced Juvia's Place shadows, I mean, these are like such an impactful shade and it's very hard to describe. My AC just got on, so sorry for that. But look at that impact. I mean, it's such a beautiful shade with such a great impact. You will definitely not be disappointed at all. Now coming on to a shade that was very, very difficult for me to dupe, and that is the last shade in the second row, which is called Funtamime. Am I missing something here? It's called Funtamime, which is like a cotton candy blue shade, very pale pastel-y blue shade. I would say if you guys have Inner Trance palette from Colourpop, the shade called Future Self is an exact dupe for that. But since I did not have that palette, the very similar shade to that, I would say, closest in my collection would be Aquamarine from the So Jaded palette. Now the finish of this shade is shimmer as compared to the matte in the Natasha Denona palette. But yes, if you guys do have the Colourpop's Inner Trance eyeshadow palette, the shade called Future Self would be an exact dupe to this. Now let's move on to the third row. The first shade in the third row is called Spiral, which is an exact dupe to the oldest palette of Colourpop, which is Yes Please palette, and the shade name is called Chauffeur, which has that metallic orange with like a gold flip to it. And yeah, mine is pretty old. I mean, my palette is like really disgusting to look at right now, but this is the shade that we're talking about. Such an exact dupe. I mean, you will be so happy that if you own that palette. I mean, all the palettes, all the shades are like coming back all together. So I'm very, very happy about that. The next shade in the Natasha Denona palette is called Magic, which is a matte purple shade. Now I have duped that with my Juvia's Place Magic Mini palette, and the shade name is called Iffy, which is also a matte purpley shade. Now this an inky purple, I would say. Look at that shade. It really looks like ink when you apply it onto your eyes. It's such a deep purple. You will definitely not be disappointed if you have this shade in your collection. Now the next shade in the Natasha Denona palette is called Aerialist, which is that taupey purple, I would say. And this shade is being duped by Colourpop's So Jaded palette again. And the shade name is called Smoky Quartz. Very, very similar shade, I would say. Look at that. According to the swatch, this like performed exactly similar to that shade. But even if you have the Essence Melted Chrome shadow in this shade, what is that called? Zinc About You, it will be a very, very close dupe to that too. Now the fourth shade in the palette is called Act, which is being duped by Masquerade Mini palette from Juvia's Place, and the shade name is called Chi. Now this shade is more of a shimmery metallic purple, and it's a very deep purple. So this is the shade that we are talking about. It's a very deep purple. This appears a lot more lighter, but looking at it, it's like when you look at the pan, this seems very, very similar. But yes, both of them are in the Masquerade Mini palette, so nothing to worry about. So this is the other lighter shade, and this is the shade Chi. See how vibrant this shade is, and this is exactly the shade that I am seeing in her swatches or on the website. So I definitely wanted to mention this shade and not this shade. But I wanted to give you both the options just because if you want variety, you already have the variety with you. Now the last shade in the palette is called Joker, which is a matte hot pink. Now this is again from the Masquerade Mini palette from the Juvia's Place, and the shade name is called Bori, which is this. And this is also a very hot pink shade. I love this shade. I absolutely love this shade. This is such a vibrant pink. Look at that. Are you kidding me? This is such a vibrant palette. If you are, obviously if you're looking for like colors and if you do not own these shades and that palette is jumping onto you that you're so interested, definitely go ahead. I'm not going to say where you want to spend your money on, but if you guys, I just wanted to give you another perspective. If you have these palette, you already might have all these shades in your collection. So that's the only purpose of this video. I really hope that this video was helpful for you guys. If you find it helpful, please do give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring the notification bell so that you're notified every time that I post next. I generally upload every Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until next time, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.